All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day of our Pedagogy into Practice conference, and I'm so glad that you are joining us here today at the 8:30 session in Hollander Hall. It's going to be fantastic. I've read all these papers, and your minds are going to be blown. So first up, we have a dual presentation. What do alumni say? How conservatory graduates employ musicianship and piano skills in their professional lives. First up is David Thurmaier, who is an associate professor of music theory and chair at the Music Studies Division at the UMKC Conservatory. He has published on Charles Ives, the Beatles, and Czech rock music in various journals, and he's currently the co-editor of the Journal of Music Theory Pedagogy. His co-presenter today is Chris Madden, an associate professor of piano pedagogy at UMKC Conservatory, where he teaches piano pedagogy, applied piano, and oversees the keyboard skills curriculum. He has published articles in American Music Teacher and the Piano Magazine, and he regularly presents workshops for national, state, and local music teachers organizations. Join me in welcoming them for today's presentation.
All right, good morning. Wait till everybody gets in here. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, terrific. With the conference theme, Teaching Music Theory in the 21st Century, in mind, our presentation today interprets the results of a survey distributed to undergraduate alumni who graduated between 2000 and 2020 from the University of Missouri Kansas City Conservatory. The Conservatory has roughly 500 music majors, the majority of whom are graduate students. Across the 20 years the survey covers, we have offered the usual array of music bachelor's degrees in areas such as performance, music education, music therapy, composition, music theory, and jazz studies. Building upon related projects by Elizabeth West Marvin in her 2012 survey sent to music theory and oral skills instructors published in JMTP, and Jennifer Snodgrass in her recent book, Teaching Music Theory, New Voices and Approaches from 2020, which also contains an alumni survey for her now former institution. Our purpose was to ascertain what current music professionals from a major conservatory environment find most and least beneficial from their musicianship, that is, music theory and oral skills, and keyboard skills training. I was hired by UMKC in 2013 to redesign and coordinate the former music theory curriculum made up of separated theory and oral skills into an integrated one where theory and skills meet daily for an hour. Chris was hired in 2019 to reimagine the keyboard skills sequence, which resulted in a newly integrated curriculum between musicianship and keyboard skills. At UMKC, musicianship and keyboard skills are co-requisites, so it makes sense to look at the impact of these courses together.
So the survey we designed allowed alumni to first rate the applicability and usefulness of specific topics in each curriculum. Second, describe their perceived level of effort when they took the courses. And third, suggest ideas for curriculum redevelopment. The main purpose was like any survey, to see what methods were working, what topics were working, and what wasn't working, and where keyboard skills and musicianship could be more integrated. In addition to Likert-based questions, we believed alums needed the opportunity for free responses to weigh in on what they thought we needed more and less of, especially since the landscapes of music theory and piano pedagogy have traversed wide and varying paths over the past 2 decades. So, after approval from our IRB office, our Director of Advancement sent the survey to alumni, and we waited for responses. All told, we got around 60 responses, 61 specifically, representing former students across all disciplines, applied areas, and professions. One might wonder why we chose alumni as a survey sample instead of just recent graduates or current students. Well, alumni are valuable for respondents for several reasons. So first, they usually have some distance from the courses that they took. And in our case, all possible respondents would have been out of the core musicianship and keyboard skills curriculum for at least 4 years. Having some distance hopefully allows for a more balanced response with a chance to reflect on what was taught. And another practical reason to elicit feedback from alumni is because many of them are our biggest advocates for future students. So if alumni's voices are heard in the process and they're able to share their input, it may generate more positive responses for possible recruitment.
Before we share the results, here are some more demographic data of the respondents. About 80% are currently employed either full or part-time in music. Others are current graduate students in music or have left the music field entirely. All instruments and voice types are represented, and employment roles include orchestral musicians, music teachers, music therapists, administrators in the arts, professors, and so on. Regarding enjoyment of music theory and oral skills, something we thought might correlate with them being beneficial, around 46% of alums said those subjects were very or extremely enjoyable, the top 2 ratings on our Likert scale, whereas only 7% said they were not at all enjoyable or slightly enjoyable, the lowest 2 ratings. Similarly, 68% said the subjects had practicality to their lives, versus only 9% who said they were not practical. Fortunately for all of us in this room, only between 3 and 5% said that theory and oral skills were not enjoyable, not practical, and extremely difficult, the most extreme range on our scale.
For keyboard skills, though, an interesting trend emerged. The largest segment of alumni, 44%, indicated they found no enjoyment or only slight enjoyment in keyboard skills. This was before I got there. Okay, yeah. Okay, this is before I got here, 20 years ago. Okay. Okay. And what is probably a related trend, 43% said the material was either very difficult or extremely difficult. But despite these negative sentiments, 53% of alumni, so just a little over half, indicated that they felt keyboard skills was practical, compared with only 27% who said it wasn't practical. Similarly, 61% felt confident or very confident using the piano in their current career, compared with only 29% who felt little to no confidence using the keyboard, a ratio of approximately 2 to 1. So, could be worse. This data, to me, suggests that while students may not have enjoyed keyboard skills, and they found it quite difficult, the majority still indicated that keyboard skills were practical for their current career, and they felt confident using the piano. So, perhaps there's a delayed appreciation for the skills they developed through what they deemed to be unenjoyable and difficult coursework.
Now for the moment of truth. What did our alums say on this survey? We have divided our results into 3 categories. First, salient trends about discipline-specific topics and skills. Second, trends and specific responses for what students want more of in both musicianship and keyboard skills. And third, trends and specific responses for what students want to see minimized. Although we can't get into great detail about the results because of time, of course, if you have questions, please let us know by email and we'll be happy to share more. While the keyboard skills results reflect a single curriculum before Chris's arrival at UMKC, as you heard, the musicianship results are even more revealing, as alums were commenting on 2 different curricula in music theory, the separated model from 2000 to 2013 and the integrated model from 2013 to 2020. As Michael Rogers notes in Teaching Approaches in Music Theory, a notable advantage of this integrated model, if taught well, is that it can provide students with immediate opportunities to reinforce skills learned the same day, as opposed to waiting for the next written or skills course. This variation was noted by some alums in their survey and suggests that better integration between theory and keyboard skills, however implemented at an institution, improves teaching efficacy. Similar to Snodgrass's survey, we asked alumni how practical and beneficial many specific music theory topics were to their current work, including fundamentals, so scales and intervals, standard core theory fare, like part writing or harmonic analysis, form, counterpoint, and post-tonal topics. The results were mixed and somewhat surprising to me, at least, with practicality and benefit dropping like a rock the further students traveled through the core sequence. For example, fundamentals topics like chord spelling, scales, intervals got the highest marks at 86%, beneficial or very beneficial, followed by harmonic analysis, which scored 72%, form, which scored around 50%. On the flip side, as you can see in the red, counterpoint and post-tonal topics fell to the bottom, with only 28% finding counterpoint beneficial. I'm keeping you in suspense here. Okay. Uh-oh. Okay. There we go. So the flip side, counterpoint and post-tonal topics fell to the bottom, with only 28% finding counterpoint beneficial, and all subtopics, set theory, 12-tone theory, of post-tonal theory scoring only 20% slightly or very beneficial. One possible interpretation I have is that before I changed the theory curriculum in 2013 to devote nearly a full semester to post-tonal topics, students only got a smattering of the material toward the end of their 4th semester, and may not have appreciated the brief coverage. Also, it makes sense the fundamentals topics would score highest because of the amount of music educators, music therapists completing the survey and likely teaching or using such concepts in their schools or privately or in clinics. And who would honestly say that such fundamentals topics are not practical or useful anyway? These results may also correspond to perceived difficulty, as counterpoint and post-tonal topics are often more challenging for students as compared to more objective areas like fundamentals or part writing. Not surprising at all was that alumni valued and recognized the importance of oral skills. The only subtopic that brooked any dissent was harmonic dictation. Again, not unusual because students find it to be challenging and scholarly studies verify their pain. Students valued, and as we'll see shortly, wanted more of oral skills of all kinds, especially sight singing, dictation, and transcription projects. Rhythmic dictation was apparently a well-loved activity, a bit odd since in the past 9 years we've not had separated rhythmic dictations as a test item, but rather have students take rhythm from melodies.
So next, let's take a look at the salient trends from the keyboard skills portion of the survey. Now, having taught keyboard skills for 11 years, either as a graduate assistant or a professor, one of the most common complaints I hear from students and some faculty members is that students will never use the piano in the future. So our survey asked a simple question. Do you use the piano in your current profession? And the answer was a resounding yes, with 78% of respondents indicating that they used the piano in some way. Now, keep in mind that approximately 20% of our respondents were no longer in the music field. So the percentage of alumni who remain in music and use the piano is likely well over 80%. Now, because of time constraints, I can't focus on all the ways in which people use the instrument. They were able to sort of list how they used it. But I will focus on one interesting finding. 77% of respondents indicated that they have taught or are currently teaching piano lessons to earn all or part of their income in music. And again, this percentage is likely higher because not all the respondents were in music. And so, while a portion of the respondents were piano majors, the vast majority were not, meaning they're teaching piano having their only experience with the instrument being a few semesters of keyboard skills. Now, anecdotally, in piano pedagogy, we know this happens all the time, but it was interesting to see the hard data. It's a lot. And so, last night we heard about, young education and how it's their first interaction with music and how it's so important. That's how I feel about piano. Often the piano at a young age, their first experience with music, and it's so important for them to have a good experience. And this indicates that maybe they're not getting the best experience a lot of the time. So that was interesting to us. Okay, so now that we've examined how many alumni employ a keyboard in their careers, as well as one example of how they employ it, let's take a look at how many semesters of keyboard skills they believe should be required of music majors. In this chart, you can see results according to major. So music education students were the strongest advocates for keyboard skills training, with 16 alumni expressing a desire for 3 or more semesters, while 8 only expressed a desire for 0 to 2 semesters, a ratio of 2 to 1. And this was in line with the broader trend across all majors, which 31 students desired 3 or more semesters, compared with only 18 students who wanted 0 to 2 semesters. So if we delve further into that 2 to 1 ratio, I thought it would be interesting to look at their perceived level of effort that they put into the course versus how much piano study they felt should be required. So that's what we see here. In this chart, you'll see the effort versus the number of semesters desired. And I thought it would be interesting to take a look at what the students who said they put little effort into the course said. So that was our lowest rating. And of the students who expressed little effort and felt that only 0 to 2 semesters of piano were necessary, 20% of them actually came in with previous piano experience. So that was interesting. And when I read their free response comments, they were basically bitter that they still had to take keyboard skills even though they had piano training. And so this represents a previous model at UMKC where students were not given the opportunity to test out of the sequence. Now, on the flip side, what about students who had little effort in the class, but still said that 3 or more semesters should be required? 80% of those students had previous piano experience. So to me, that indicates that they came in with piano skills, they recognized they didn't have to do very much because they could already do it, but they felt the skills were important, which is why they said everybody should be taking 3 to 4 semesters of keyboard skills. So I thought that was a really interesting trend.
The most useful and intriguing responses for me relate to what alumni thought should be either added or enhanced in the theory curriculum, and what should be minimized. With current fashionable discussions occurring in the field regarding subverting the Western classical music canon and/or minimizing it, we received scant feedback in support of doing so. By contrast, alums took a more measured perspective, reflecting the gradual broadening of music theory pedagogy over the past 80 years, favoring nuanced and enriching ways to build on what we already do well. For example, a strong majority mentioned adding instruction on popular rock and jazz musics in general, even drilling down to specific topics they currently use in their own occupations, like reading lead sheets, the Nashville number system, modes, and transcription projects.
So in this pie chart, you can see what topics students wish to add to the piano curriculum. And as you can see, the biggest priority for students was to play more popular music, followed closely by more keyboard harmony. A desire for more accompanying activities and more explanation, understanding of how things aligned in the curriculum actually came close to the top. And then a desire to study more repertoire and improvise was also up there. During the implementation portion of this presentation, we'll discuss curricular elements and how they address these statistics.
As for what to minimize in the musicianship curriculum, alums centered on a few key areas. First, in keeping with the current thinking at most institutions now, less emphasis on set theory or 12-tone music, with some responses stating the concepts were interesting, but not often applied to performance and composition. Second, though some students stated that part writing had its place and application and some enjoyed it, it could probably be minimized in favor of more composition or writing projects in general. That is to say, with figuration or different writing styles for piano, as well as geared toward performance. Finally, in a question where we asked for any additional comments, we were struck by how many students said to either keep the curriculum as it is, not to make it easier, even though alums may have not used everything taught, and the curriculum's moving in the right direction, and desiring a lot more emphasis on oral skills. With subjects we know can be hard sells to music majors, it was rewarding to learn that though there were some specific gripes about certain topics, by and large, alums seemed grateful for the training they had across multiple curricular designs.
For keyboard skills, when asked about topics they wanted to see minimized, students indicated scales and transposition equally, followed closely by figured bass, classical reading, and keyboard harmony. For me, the appearance of keyboard harmony on the list of both what to add and what to minimize was interesting. And one hypothesis I have is that more students might view keyboard harmony favorably if they understood how it directly related to what they were studying in the theory classroom, which is something that I've done on a week-by-week basis. This is supported by students' desire for their need to understand the relevance of what they're doing. And it's also in line with adult teaching pioneer Malcolm Knowles. So I do a lot of andragogy work, adult learners. And Malcolm Knowles is one of the pioneers of that field. And he says that for adult learners, which I consider college students to be, one of the primary tenets of their education is that they have a need to know why it is they're doing what they're doing. And so I think with the keyboard harmony, I think that goes along with that.
With these findings in mind, Chris and I have begun to build on the many things we do well in the Conservatory, offer a solid foundation in tonal theory, oral skills, post-tonal theory, and keyboard skills, and look to enhance and inject our current courses with the following activities and topics: more theory and analysis of popular music and jazz, an emphasis on practical application, and a greater attention to oral skills within the integrated curriculum. To this end, even though some of these suggestions were already in process, I will take the feedback to our theory instructors and ask them to find more room for sight singing and dictation in their courses, dictations of all kinds. As we know, these topics are often shortchanged in classes because of their challenging and, from the student's perspective, often frustrating nature. In the fourth semester of musicianship, focused on post-tonal theory for the most part, we will broaden materials on popular song and jazz harmony and buttress that area of interest. Instead of time on part writing without clear and demonstrable goals, we will retool writing projects, some short, some longer, to spur student creativity by writing for different instruments and styles, and make the most of being at a conservatory where most students are performance majors and can perform for each other in class, thus tightening the sense of community.
And in the realm of keyboard skills, like I said, I completely redesigned the 4-semester sequence. And all curricular changes were made before we received the results of this survey. So it was really interesting to see what I did in the curriculum and then the survey results come in and see what was there according to what alumni wanted and what wasn't. But specifically, as noted above, what alumni wanted was to see more applicability and relevance to their other coursework. And so one of my first priorities was to create a week-by-week alignment of the musicianship and keyboard skills curricula. So for example, in levels 1 to 2, this focuses on just fundamentals keyboard harmony. When cadential 6/4 chords are introduced in musicianship syllabus, that's when they're introduced in keyboard skills, the same week, and so on. As the curriculum moves towards level 3 and level 4, I strategically chose sight reading, transposition, and harmonization examples that include the phrase structures being studied in musicianship. So I look for sentence structure, I look for parallel periods, contrasting periods, and that's what they play in their keyboard skills class. Also, in terms of their repertoire, I choose pieces that have the same structures that they're starting to study in form. So we do sonatinas when they do sonata form, we do easy rondos when they're doing rondo form, things like that. But besides this alignment, perhaps most importantly, in my weekly meetings with graduate assistants, I stress the importance of overtly telling students about the relationship between their musicianship and their keyboard skills classes. Because if you read literature on transfer in education, most students do not naturally make transfers between various courses. You have to tell them, okay? And so I think that's part of what I encourage my graduate assistants to do is explain that it's a week-by-week alignment. So, while time constraints prohibit us from discussing all of the curricular revisions, you can see some of the other ones that we've made on this slide.
In closing, we know all surveys are imperfect because we did not get feedback from an enormous sample set, thus potentially altering any precise findings. However, those who did submit the survey provided valuable input across both our areas and thus allowed us to continue the goal of putting pedagogy into practice. Thank you. Yeah.
All right, we have some time for questions. If you just raise your hand, I'll run over to the mic. That way everyone here and on the live stream can hear your question.
Thanks very much for this. It's so wonderful to see data and then to think about how you respond to that data. And I think that analysis part is really the critical piece. So it's really great to see the work you're doing. You sort of alluded to this right at the end, but I have a quick question and a follow-up about what your response rate actually was.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I mean, it was low, right?
Yeah.
So out of 20 years, and if you think about undergraduate alumni over that length of time, it's quite a few if you consider, you know, an annual class size. So yeah, the response rate was low. We would like it to be higher. Unfortunately, that's how it often goes with surveys.
I would also, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but we had some issues from our director, well, the person who sent it out, because we weren't allowed to get the actual names of alums. So it had to go through an office, and she sent it out 3 different times and sent it to people who didn't graduate with undergraduate degrees, and then I'm getting emails, why am I getting this? I got my DMA here, why am I getting this about undergrad theory? So there were some glitches. So I think that may have also played a factor into
Yeah,
people.
it just made me think too, considering the response rate was so low, that perhaps the people who did respond are sort of the ones who've bought into your curriculum more, and that you're not getting responses from people who maybe, you know, were not enthusiastic about it. And so assuming that the curriculum is fantastic because the most enthusiastic people responded and said, it is fantastic, is maybe there's another story going on around, you know, the people who dropped out or the people who
Sure.
didn't even apply and what their impressions might have been.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you think of the parallel to student evaluations. It's very, strong, or they either love you or they hate you, it seems. So the people who are really enthusiastic fill it out. Others think, doesn't matter, I don't care. So, but that's a great point. We'll keep that in mind. So thanks.
I'm so interested in what you've done in keyboard skills, aligning it with music theory. At my institution, there's some tension between what we call piano class and keyboard skills.
Yeah.
So piano classes focuses on learning little bits of repertoire and learning scales and arpeggios and learning elementary piano technique. But this seems more focused on practical skills and so on. So I'm just wondering how you balance is there another piano class, or is this where they're getting their repertoire too?
Yeah, this is where they get their repertoire too. So in an ideal world, these piano classes would be divided up according to major, but that's hard to predict. It's hard to, enrollment and things like that. So you kind of have to do a little bit of everything, but one way that I try to get around that is you can see like career projects up there. So for example, after a couple semesters of piano, I say, okay, well, you have 2 more semesters left. You're going to have to start thinking about how do you want to use the piano in your career? Everybody comes to the piano for a different reason. A performance major comes to the piano for one reason. Music therapist needs to sing and play in different styles. So how do you want to use the piano? And there is a lot of room in these courses for them to say, okay, this is how I think I could use this effectively. And then there's projects within the class for them to do that.
I think that's really fantastic, because we've had very separate tracks and tried to make the two come together and not been very successful.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
congratulations on
Thanks.
that.
Yeah.
Thanks for the presentation. I'm also very interested in doing this at my university, so we've got Jenny and Betsy and David and Chris to model this for us. So I have like 2 sort of short questions, which is you kind of alluded to the fact that you've already made a lot of the changes, and this sort of checked the boxes like, high five, we did it. Nailed it.
I don't know about that. We're not
So I was wondering,
not
I was
going out for
wondering if there
drinks or
was
anything.
other discrepancies or things that you actually gleaned from this that you're going to implement like right away, as opposed to the stuff you've already like, oh, we already fixed the post-tonal issue, or oh, we already have the week-by-week alignment. So if you have any of those things. And then secondly, if you could go back and change anything in the survey, is there any advice to those of us that are about to, like a way you asked the question, or aside from the distribution and the IRB, which is always problematic?
Oh my gosh, did we have, I was sort of screaming at somebody during that.
Well, in terms of, changes that I would do, for me, like the scales and arpeggios, I'm gonna keep minimizing them. I mean, in terms of the emphasis on fingerings and things like that, I mean, I think they're really important for understanding of keys and chords and things like that. But there used to be metronome requirements in playing them, and that's sort of not what we're there to get them to do. The other thing I've done with technique, things like that, is they do video portfolios for things like that. So instead of them coming to an exam and getting so nervous about what finger do I start on for the A-flat major scale, they have a portfolio due at the end of the semester with X number of scales and arpeggios and keys, and it's all video. So I'm more interested in, can they do it, and submit a video that shows me they can do it, as opposed to you have to sit down at 10:10 in the morning and play an A-flat major scale perfectly. So those are some things that I'm looking at doing. Yeah.
For theory, I think what I mentioned earlier, it's the ongoing issue of getting as much oral skills as is possible. And we also have a couple of new instructors who, one is a theorist, one is not. And so trying to get them to understand you've got 5 days a week of integrated skills. With theory, it's not we spend the whole time on part writing and then tomorrow we'll do some sight singing. And so trying to just get that a little bit smoother. I think we have one of our current instructors here. I think she's got it down by now for sure, but not everybody does yet. So I think trying to find as many ways, and I got some great ideas from papers yesterday from implementing more oral skills in the curriculum. So that's probably the ongoing challenge, because that's practical, relevant, I don't like that word, relevant and useful. So, and then in terms of the questions we've asked, I think We talked about something yesterday.
Yeah, it was hard. I mean, we asked a lot of free response, and I think at the end of the day, we wish we had done more of the Likert items. It's just easier to work with the data that way. Because when you have so many free response, then you have to sit down and decide how are we going to code these responses, make sure we're on the same page about all of that. So I think that's what we would have done.
Yeah.
All right, well, that is our time for questions for this paper. Join me again in welcoming and thanking David and Chris.
Do it again. Thank you.
All right, and as we are switching over, I'll go ahead and introduce our next presenter. Presenting his presentation, But What About the Grad Students? Consideration of Theory Requirements for Master's and Doctoral Students in Performance Programs is Matthew Heap. Matthew Heap is a composer and theorist with research interest in the pedagogy of music theory and 20th century analysis. He has articles in the Routledge Companion to Music Theory Pedagogy and the AR Editions Music Anthology. And he's currently an associate professor at West Virginia University. Join me in welcoming Matthew Heap.
Check. Yep. It's wandering away.
All right. So that's one more time. All right. Don't get too excited when you present.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Good morning. Much has been rightly written on the best ways to reach undergraduate students through the structuring and content of the core theory curriculum, but less has been said on the topic of theory classes for graduate students who are not theory-focused in their degrees. Today, I will discuss some of the problems that have been troubling me and will offer some thoughts that are still somewhat aspirational, and some parts are easier lifts than others, but that I hope will spark conversations about the purpose and execution of theory in the graduate setting. I have found that graduate performance students tend to struggle with the application of theory in their degrees in a similar way to the undergraduates. Every time I'm on a graduate committee and the oral comprehensive exam turns to theory matters, I always open with a question like, why do we make you take theory as a graduate student? The students mostly look thoughtful and come up with something along the lines of, I use theory to understand how the music is put together and why, and that helps me to interpret it. My follow-up is always, great, so tell me about a piece from the last year that you analyzed and how that analysis informed your interpretation. In all but one student, I've been treated to the deer in headlights look, and then some murmuring about how a superficial aspect of form helped them memorize something. From the dreaded graduate theory entrance exam through the even more dreaded graduate theory review course to the positively terrifying comprehensive exam in theory, many students seem to lurch from one goalpost to the next, doing what they need to move on, but not retaining as much as we'd like. Before getting into details, however, I'd like to quickly outline my data gathering process. I first reached out to the SMT Pedagogy list with a short survey asking about theory requirements for DMA programs in performance. Next, I trawled through the catalogs of an additional 34 schools from across the country to look for the number of required theory credits, available courses, and whether they are required or student choice, whether there is an entrance exam, and if theory makes up a part of the comprehensive exam. I found a number of schools where the credits were split up between different disciplines, most often musicology, and in the spirit of equality, divided the total number of credits by the total possible number of subjects. Finally, there were some schools where students chose a minor or cognate, and so might end up taking 12 credits of theory or none at all. This digging gave me an overview of how theory was approached in DMA performance programs across the country. So let's start at the beginning with the graduate theory entrance exam. This is where all that focus on undergraduate theory hopefully pays off. They retain the knowledge, pass the exam with ease, and move on to higher level coursework. According to surveys by Ronald Ross, 90% of the NASM accredited schools that responded in 1986 had entrance exams, and over 80% had them as of 1996. In my own research, nearly all the schools today required some kind of theory entrance exam and remedial work if that exam was not passed. Over the last 5 years at West Virginia University, around 80% of the students have failed at least one part of the exam, despite my attempts to streamline it and make it more accessible. Our test has ear training, definition of terms, Roman numeral analysis, pop chord analysis, and short answer questions about musical excerpts. Getting less than 70% on any one section sends a student either into an undergraduate course or grad theory review, with the exception of pop chords, which can be remediated through individual meetings. I think you'll agree that something is wrong with a test that 80% of students don't pass. There's a secondary problem here as well. All the questions, with the exception of pop chords, draw on the Western classical tradition, which makes sense as the vast majority of DMA students are coming to us to undertake high-level study in that tradition. I fear, however, that the current movement, which I fully support, to diversify both the composers and the styles that we teach our undergraduates is not represented in these very Western classical specific questions. This is leading us to difficult advising situations. I am currently implementing a choose-your-own-adventure system for undergraduate theory, which I gleefully borrowed from a presentation by some of the Appalachian State faculty last time we were together, where students get a slightly condensed core curriculum and then can make choices based on their interests and career goals with courses such as the analysis of popular music, songwriting, and 20th century counterpoint, alongside stalwarts such as 18th and 19th century analysis and 20th century analysis. The problem here is that if a student wants to go to grad school and be as efficient as possible, they are advised to take the latter two classes, which, while we are increasing diversity by looking outside the traditional canon, are still Western classical in nature. So in some ways, graduate theory entrance exams that hew to part writing, Roman numeral analysis, and formula analysis are undermining our diversity efforts at the undergraduate level. This leads into a consideration of what performance DMA students should be learning from theory. I think theory classes should give students an array of tools to look at whatever music they might be asked to play and the critical thinking skills to make informed decisions about how to play it. It is also important to consider that many of these students are looking for teaching positions, whether in academia or outside it. Given the current state of the university systems across the US, I suspect that more than a few will be teaching theory, especially in disciplines with low studio numbers. Looking at the data, the majority of institutions I researched required 6 credits of theory, with 3 credits and 9 credits in second and third place. Again, this is less scientific than I'd like it to be, given that some schools split credits between different disciplines, probably. Disciplines, yep. So there's a possibility that there's a bunch of 0 credits that aren't represented on this graph. The vast majority of classes that were available were Western classical focused, with a sprinkling of popular music analysis courses and a world music analysis course or 2, and some indeterminate topics in theory and or doctoral theory seminars. While I do not dispute the importance of these classes to the training of these high-level musicians, I do worry that we're building another generation of students who see Western classical music as the only music. They then take that worldview into their teaching, and it continues to be propagated. After they finish their coursework, these students move on to the comprehensive exams. I have less data on the structure of these across the country, but from what I could gather, it seems pretty evenly split between a theory faculty written exam portion and a committee written exam portion. In many schools with a cognate that could make up the entirety of the theory requirement, the student was tested on that cognate, and so students might or might not have a theory portion at all. Ours has a theory faculty written and graded section for the written portion, and any further questions in the oral portion are at the discretion of the committee. The written part follows a similar kind of structure to the entrance exam, a selection of terms with given incorrect or incomplete definitions that the students have to correct and provide their own explanation for, 3 analyses, a common Bach fugue and romantic lead, and a 20th century piece that is specific to the student's instrument, given to them a week before the test, and a short answer question on a 1-page piece that they are seeing for the first time on exam day. With the analysis pieces, students are given a big picture question as a prompt for an essay. We split up the responses among the theory faculty for grading, and I put together a consensus report. We are strongly discouraged from using language that indicates passing or failing, instead using descriptors such as strong and weak, and leaving it to the students' committee to interpret or ignore our comments and then decide the student's fate. This test compounds the problems that I mentioned above. Students tend to produce weak work despite succeeding in theory classes, and the test is completely Eurocentric, which makes students less willing to take classes with diverse styles because they're so focused on this exam, and therefore on the music of the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. After passing this, students hopefully finish their research document and graduate, going to jobs in an academic world that often asks them to teach a variety of subjects. Students likely fall back on what they learned in graduate school, and the Western cycle is perpetuated. To be clear, I have no problem with students learning about Western classical music, but like many scholars in our field, I feel like we shouldn't be teaching that to the exclusion of other music. So what are the solutions? What are the concrete things that we can do to break the cycle and try to bring more diversity into our programs? I have some ideas, and I hope that we can continue this discussion here and at our institutions. First, I'd like to propose that we commit to reforming the graduate theory entrance exam. NASM's handbook states that, quote, member institutions shall require entrance auditions and examinations appropriate to the goals and objectives of the graduate program as a whole and each graduate program as applicable. These should be designed to test for present attainments at the entering level rather than to demonstrate achievement at a more advanced graduate level. Students admitted with deficiencies should be required to remove them early in their programs, end quote. That wording is quite vague. What are the goals of the program? Is it to churn out performers who are entirely focused on the Western classical canon, or to produce musicians with exceptional critical thinking skills and the tools to tackle any kind of music? In my ideal world, we would agree to stop doing these exams for incoming graduate performance majors and have a graduate level introductory course that I'll talk about later. But short of that, I would suggest that we try to represent the critical thinking aspects of music theory more than the technical aspects. That would mean worrying less about whether they know the precise definition of, say, hexachordal combinatoriality, or are able to voice lead perfectly, and more about whether they can form a coherent argument about a given piece of music that might or might not be from the Western classical world. That kind of testing allows students to have some choice in their undergraduate theory career and allows us to assess their higher level thinking capabilities. I'm not suggesting that the entire test needs to be like that. An undergraduate level understanding of analytical tools is still necessary to succeed in graduate classes. I would rather argue that the understanding of tools is not the only predictor of success. Next comes the graduate theory review problem. Our class combines the material of the last 2 semesters of the written and oral theory core curricula. The most obvious challenge here is that it is next to impossible to both cover all the material and go into it in any depth, leading to a shallow understanding at best in the people who have not been exposed to the subject before. The first option we could consider is to keep doing what we've been doing, but try to broaden the scope. Another option is to individualize theory review. William Harbinson wrote a persuasive article from 2013 about an online review class that was modular in nature. A student was told which modules they had to pass and was presented with a refresher video, some exercises from the internet, and an assessment. At the end, they took the entrance exam again and hopefully passed. A situation where graduate students take the exam at the beginning of the summer, do remedial work over the summer, and hit the ground running in the fall seems ideal. Another option, and one that I would advocate for, is an analytical tools class at the beginning of graduate studies. It could be an analog to the ubiquitous research methods or bibliography classes. One benefit of this is that all graduate students would have a common foundation from which to build their graduate work. This would help not only the students, but the professors for higher level courses. For instance, I teach the course Compositional Methods in Contemporary Music, which is a fancy way of saying 20th, 21st century analysis. But I never quite make it to the 21st century because I have to spend a good chunk of time at the beginning of the semester teaching students the basics of set theory and how tone rows work. If they already had those tools, we would be able to spend more time digging deeply into the topic. In theory, this course is an excellent solution. In practice, it could be a challenge to structure. Which tools are the most critical? In a 14-week course, I would propose 6 different units. The first 2 weeks would be a quick review of Roman numeral analysis, followed by a 2-week examination of linear analysis, which would hopefully not be entirely new to the students. We'd continue to the fundamentals of set theory and tone rows for about 4 weeks, then switch gears and make sure everyone had an understanding of how chord symbols work. Finally, there would be a 4-week examination of ways of looking at rhythm and melody from a global perspective, perhaps incorporating ideas from Mark Heijel's Towards a Global Music Theory, written in 2016. This book, while not without its own problems, contains models for the analysis of elements of global musics that could be adapted for the classroom. Another idea for those last 4 weeks would be a unit on Schmerg, as admirably outlined by Stanley Kleppinger yesterday. There are many ways that this class could be structured, and many topics that I've necessarily left out, but it would give students a set of tools that could be used in doctoral level seminars and also serve to refresh their memories of what they learned in their undergraduate years. It is not a class that is meant for deep examination of styles or genres, or one that requires high levels of critical thinking, but that can all come later. This could take the place of both the graduate theory entrance exam and the graduate theory review class, and could solve some of the problems that I mentioned with both. After students have the requisite knowledge to process or to progress to higher level seminars, either through a graduate theory review or some kind of tools class, the next question is what they should study and how many credits should they do. While there are benefits to the and/or model, where a student can choose between classes from several academic subjects, I do worry that students will tend to opt out of theory altogether. I base this on observations from WVU. Students are given the choice between 18th, 19th century, 20th century, theory topics, and theory pedagogy as doctoral seminars. They have to take one at that level, and then either can take a second or choose something from the upper level undergraduate theory courses. Despite being advised to take 18th, 19th, or 20th century analysis for maximal comprehensive exam preparation, many choose theory pedagogy not because they're particularly interested in it, but because they perceive it to be less rigorous than others. Spoiler alert, it isn't. Now, clearly, I love teaching and thinking about theory pedagogy, but given the current structure of our comprehensive exams, it is not a class that is optimal for them. There will always be students who eschew theory because they view it as difficult or abstract, something to be avoided rather than embraced. And so we're back to engagement again. And I wonder if a choose-your-own-adventure model might work here as well. They take their tools or grad theory review class, if applicable, then they move on to either tonal or atonal theory, and then they turn the page, and then they choose from a wider array of courses that would hopefully include topics outside the Western canon. This brings up a feasibility issue. How can we offer all those classes given the number of faculty we have and how stretched we generally all are? Well, to any administrators listening, I'd say hire more theory professors. Failing that, we could structure it so there are always 2 seminars in the spring semester, which would probably be tonal and atonal analysis, and then 2, excluding the tools grad theory review, in the fall that would deal with more diverse topics. With the tools class taken into consideration, that's 9 credits of required theory, which might be a stretch in some programs, but I think it's a fight worth having. The last problem on my list was the comprehensive exams. This is a place where there is so much variation between universities that it is hard to speak generally. While we have had a specific theory portion of the comprehensive exam for many years, the questions used to be kind of a hybrid between committee-generated and theory area-generated. The theory faculty proposed 2 questions for each section, and the committee chose between them. The good thing about that system was that there was room to tailor questions to the courses the students had taken. The negative was that comprehensive exam grading, which the entire theory area works on, became nightmarish, as we frequently had 12 to 16 exams in the fall semester. A change in the way the tests were written happened about 4 years ago, and since then the test has been a little more standardized, as I mentioned earlier. I propose that a good structure going forward for this would be to give some choice. Give students 2 options for bigger pieces to look at. One could be a Western classical piece, and the other could be something that relates to one of the more diverse styles that was taught in a recent seminar. Students would analyze one of these before the test and come in and answer questions about the one they chose. I still like our terms section with its inaccurate definitions. They are a good way to test nuance. But I think the scope of the terms we use could be expanded. I might suggest adding an essay section where the students pick from a series of essay prompts that deal with material that was taught over the previous 2 years. Finally, I also like our, what I call, super secret short answer analysis question. But again, the variety of content could be expanded. The goal is to test on-the-spot analysis and critical thinking, and if they took the analytical tools class, they should have whatever they need to deal with a simple question about almost any kind of music. My hope is that by diversifying our offerings, including our entrance and comprehensive exams, we can give students the opportunity to explore topics they are interested in without being penalized for having theory interests outside Western classical music. I hope that this allows for a movement across the country to embrace diversified undergraduate curricula. And I hope that the performance DMA students, or better, all DMA students, will see and experience this model and then take it to the places they end up teaching. This is the way we break the cycle that makes it more challenging than it should be to incorporate music that doesn't fit into the Western classical canon. What I have presented today is just one way of approaching this. I'm sure there are many others. But whatever the means, I think that this diversification is a worthy and necessary pursuit. And so, here at the end, we come back to my opening anecdote about the comprehensive exam students who panic when asked to give a concrete example for how they use music theory, most likely because they don't. Will this revision help those students? I think that the focus on tools first, then critical thinking through graduate seminars will set the students up for success in those later classes, which in turn will make theory less stressful for them, and therefore something they might turn to when working on music, rather than a reminder of a difficult time in their lives. If we give them some choice in their studies, especially choices that might resonate with them more, we also might see that increased engagement that will help them not only be excellent players, but well-rounded musicians who view theory as an essential part of their craft. Thank you.
All right, we have a few minutes for questions.
Thank you for a thought-provoking presentation. I'm going to put my administrator, since you shouted us out here, my division chair's hat on. And I hear a lot about we need to have options and choice and all of these different things for students. Oh, we'll have 6 different seminars, all that. Who's going to teach these classes? And how, given what we currently have in the way, as you said, things are set up, at least at our university, we also have faculty who can't teach graduate seminars, who teach undergraduates only, and there's a lot of logistical things. I mean, they're great goals, and I think we all support them broadly. But I'm just wondering about the practicality, and maybe if you could talk a little bit more about what you do at West Virginia.
Yeah, that's a really important and difficult point, right? Is that we don't have enough people to teach the things that we need to teach. And as Zach actually was talking about yesterday, we actually should be thinking, well, should we be teaching world music? Do we have that expertise? And I don't think we do at WVU at the moment. So we do have some like popular music, musical theater, focused theory people, so that could be on the table. In terms of the the faculty required to teach all of these things. I'm wondering if there could be some crossover between the Choose Your Own Adventure, which is working okay in terms of faculty load for the undergraduates, and the graduate theory seminars. So maybe the doctoral seminars in the spring, one could be the doctoral seminar that's focused on, say, 18th and 19th, and then at the same time we have the 20th century in the undergrads, and some of the graduate students could take that as well if they want, which is the model we currently use. And then the following spring it switches. In the fall, in the same way, we could have analysis of popular music that has an upper level undergraduate component, and that same doctoral level where we have slightly different outcomes for both, but it's taught within the same structure. So not ideal. I've found it difficult to balance graduate students and undergraduate students, especially in 20th century analysis. But it's doable, and it's one step towards this. I think if we can show the administrators that it can work, maybe they will give us the funding that we need to get that extra theory professor.
Thanks very much for this, Matthew. Just a point of clarification and one observation. So you said, I think, that the exit examination, the comprehensive exam at the end, is so powerful at your school that it's actually driving enrollment among graduate students. But at the same time, there's a committee that can ignore the results?
I don't know if my administrators are watching the live stream, but yeah, so we are allowed to write, we write a descriptor of how they did, and then we are allowed to say weak, strong, slightly weak, things like that, but we cannot say pass, fail. So the committee then takes that and says, oh, well, I looked through it with my, whoever eyes, and it looked pretty good to me, so, we'll pass them along, which doesn't happen all the time, but I was actually on a committee once where the head of the committee said, well, the theory area said it was weak, but didn't fail, so that probably means it's passing. Yeah. I was like, we're not allowed to say that. And so, I set that person straight, and we remediated it, but it's a difficult situation.
It is. I've taught a summer analytical process course for graduate students of, various subdisciplines in music. Very few would be theory-focused people for 20 years, and tried it. I don't think it's ever been the same from one summer to the next. And I have to say that I've found the tools approach to be the least successful. It seems to me that out of context, teaching tools is largely a waste of time. They don't. It doesn't mean anything. They don't mean anything. They don't have any musical applicability, and that's where I think you can engage these students. So I've now, sort of settled on an approach that at sort of its foundation is literature-driven. The students pick the music, interested, we look at the music, we come up together with interesting questions, and if there's something we'd like to know, we agree that we'd like to know about this piece, well, there may be an analytical tool that can help us there, and that's when analytical tools are introduced, if at all, right?
Yeah.
But, so that's just, my experience with that approach. I like the model, and if it were to work, I could see how it would work. But I think that what you'd find is that having gone through this course and acquiring all of these tools, the payoff would be very, very impoverished. The other thing is, one of the things that we teach graduate students, that we teach all of our students, through all of these courses that have analysis in the title, is actually the application of analytical tools. And that's the problem. They think that this is analysis. And the application of analytical tools and analysis are not the same thing.
Right.
Right? You can own a hammer and a saw and a chisel and everything. It doesn't make you a carpenter, right? You're not going to use these tools. So I think analysis-driven and getting away from the tools or having the analysis bring in the tools as necessary is the way to go. But I really appreciate many of the things that you say, so something to consider. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I appreciate that, that feedback. I think that that's a really good idea to focus, either to focus on things the students bring in and say, oh, well, this is what we can learn from that, or to take Stanley Kleppinger's model from yesterday and kind of focus on the oral aspect of things and then introduce tools as necessary. And that's something I'll definitely take into consideration.
All right, unfortunately we are out of time for questions at the moment, but if you have any more, feel free to reach out to Matthew over the rest of the conference. So join me in giving him a round of applause one more time. All right, and we have one more presentation for this early morning session before we head into a short break and then to our poster session. And last but certainly not least is a presentation entitled Rethinking Remedial, a new approach to graduate theory review course, to the graduate theory review course. This presentation is by Christopher Gage, who holds doctorates in organ performance and music theory from the University of Kansas. He currently teaches music theory at the University of Delaware and serves as the director of music at Overbrook Presbyterian Church in Philadelphia. His broad research interests include keyboard pedagogy, 17th century North German organ repertoire, and 20th century game show music. Aside from music, Chris enjoys cooking, baking, watching The Golden Girls, and having strong opinions about the match game Hollywood Squares Hour. Fantastic introduction. Join me in welcoming Chris.
Okay, so should I start talking? Okay. And should I start talking? How's this? For most graduate students, the notion of taking an additional course, especially one for theory review, is not exactly a thrilling one. But what if we could make this course engaging and fun for these graduate students? Imagine that. But first, some background. At the University of Delaware, incoming graduate students take a placement exam for music theory. Those who score under a certain threshold are required to take a theory review course. This course presents several challenges, not least of which, student motivation and morale. An overload of material to cover, all of Western music theory. Relevance, sorry David, to future courses, it's coming again later, and usefulness after graduate school. In order to redesign the course, we made 3 changes. First, we made smarter use of class time by allowing more time in class for discussion and critical thinking. Second, we expanded the repertoire, introducing a more diverse array of examples and techniques. And third, we created meaningful assignments by balancing 4-part writing with other skills to provide a more comprehensive experience. So let's talk first about the issue of class time. I found that flipping the classroom was essential to the course redesign. Each week, the students were assigned online tasks, watch a video lecture, take a short quiz, complete a homework assignment. The quiz and assignment focused on recalling details and applying them to basic scenarios. So here are just some examples of quiz questions. We have word for word from one of the slides about a 1/5 prolongation. And we have some Roman numeral fill in the blank. And we have just some recalling about the 2 predominant chords, 2 and 4. Now, this class met twice per week. So day 1 of each week began with a brief summary of the video lecture, as well as an opportunity for students to ask questions. Then a variety of activities facilitated skill building, including oral skills practice, which usually involved identification and short dictation, group analysis of scores, and discovery of additional details. Day 2 continued the discussion of the week's topic, and students had the opportunity to refine their skills with individual and group work, melody harmonization, improvisation, and discussion of more advanced details. In-class activities asked students to use what they had learned in new ways and collaborate on their tasks. Here's one exercise for second species counterpoint. Given the part of the melody from the planets, Jupiter, students were asked to find a contrapuntal backbone. And so the solution would be, you have the bass line as the cantus firmus. We did have to fake it in that second to last measure. Oh well. And then they had to select which notes went where in order to create a good contrapuntal line. So we end up with this. And so we have all three aspects of second species counterpoint. We have consonant skips, neighbor tones, and passing tones. And here's the punchline. For fourth species counterpoint, we can do the second half of the melody because there's a nice little suspension there with the G over the A flat. Without the need to do a full lecture, our in-person meetings could cover additional but related topics in a more hands-on manner. And these meetings reinforced skills that are often overlooked in a review course, skills like score reading, texture, rhythm and meter, ensemble singing, peer editing and feedback, and reading and writing about music. Our second change was expanding the repertoire. As music theorists, we need to be mindful of the traditions and structures that we promote. In-class and homework examples incorporated music by women and Black and Indigenous people of color, including the following, and I suspect that many of us have already incorporated a lot of these figures into our own coursework, like Amy Beach, Cecile Chaminade, Elizabeth Cotton, Samuel Coleridge Taylor, Lily Wukalani, and Florence Price. But most of these composers are still common practice, or at least common practice adjacent. So I also wanted to introduce new topics and techniques that allowed us to move past common practice music. For example, our in-class discussion on dissonance treatment now included rhythmic dissonance, which allowed us to compare the two very different pieces, Industry Baby by Lil Nas X and Graceful Ghost Rag by William Bolcom. The topic of the submedian led to the introduction of the axis progression in popular music, so that opens up about 50 years of pop music to draw from. And pop music was also incorporated into form discussions. All of these modifications helped us to apply music theory to a broader array of musical styles. The third change for the review course was to create meaningful assignments. So I designed assignments with a new question in mind. What do we want students to be able to do once they leave this course? We had some immediate concerns. First, we wanted to improve their understanding of basic tonal harmony, and we wanted to prepare them for a required theory seminar on a specific topic, such as variation forms, analysis and performance, and theory pedagogy. Our broader goal, however, was to facilitate critical thinking, to allow students to engage with music theory on a deeper level. The improvement of skills and understanding required approaching topics in new ways. I found that an overemphasis on four-part writing was preventing students from learning other important skills. For a number of reasons. SATB writing can be time-consuming. A review of all the voice leading principles would take up too much time in a one-semester course. Often, two or more voices in one chord are simply filler and rely only on knowledge of chord spelling. Now, while I do value this discipline in a two-year undergraduate curriculum, it had to be minimized for this class. That's not to say that the four-part chorale style could not be useful. I, in fact, used it to illustrate specific topics in the redesign course, such as figured bass, suspensions, individual chord spelling, and 6/4 chords. Even so, most exercises involve students reading and analyzing, not writing SATB excerpts in order to gain fluency. Here's one example from our unit on figured bass, where they were given a four-part chorale and they were asked to provide the full, unabbreviated figures for each bass note. In the case of many skills, outer voice writing was highly effective. Now, why outer voices? Well, first, having only two voices allowed for greater focus. They didn't have to worry about writing all four voices. Contrapuntal devices could be illustrated quickly and practiced easily. You only need the soprano and bass to illustrate a passing prolongation or voice exchange. Certain chromatic alterations to the bass line helped to introduce new topics, such as applied chords, If you have a predominant supported by scale degree 4, raise that 4, you have a 5, 6, 5, a 5. And so that's a way to get them to start to understand some of the alterations that they could make. And finally, familiarity with outer voice structure helped students find such an underlying structure in thicker textures. So here are some examples of the outer voice writing exercises that they were given. So this is what we called a progression recipe, where given certain parameters, you have to write a full progression. Here, 2 prolongations and a PAC, and so they only had to write the outer voices because I wanted them to focus on contrapuntal excellence, not on having to fill in all of the verticalities. Here we have a diatonic harmonization of a hymn tune, and they were asked to change one of the bass notes to be an applied chord. And so we have here, we could change either the B flat or the A flat. We could raise that, and that could be a 5, 6, 5, either of 5, or, either of 6 or of 5. I also found that focusing on context and goals was more important than full Roman numeral analysis. So, for example, for applied chords, students were asked only to find the chord and identify the temporary key. Here we have a song by Fanny Mendelssohn Hensel, and we see they're looking for the clue note for the applied chord, and that would be this chord right here with the E sharp. They'd circle that top to bottom, and they would write what the temporary key would be. Questions on modulation focused on the pivot chord. So they were asked, given the fact that a passage modulates, they were asked to find the beginning key, the ending key. And then this was an exercise I called modulation zoom in, where first they found the general area where they started to hear the music change, where they start to see clues that the music is modulating. And then they go in and they find a specific pivot chord. Assignments on the Neapolitan triad and the augmented sixth had students practice finding clues that would lead them to those chords, and modal mixture as well. Like this next example, an organ piece by Florence Price. So they're looking for the clue. We have modal mixture. That would be the lowered 6th scale degree in the last measure, that B flat. So it's a 2/2 diminished 7. And that's all I wanted them to find to get the point of the modally mixed predominance. For many topics, scavenger hunt style questions let students do important or unusual harmonies. Here's an excerpt of an organ piece, can you guess what instrument I play, by J.S. Bach, and they're asked to find 3 suspensions, 2 passing tones, and 1 double neighbor figure. And then they would find these and collaborate with each other and compare their answers. And the great thing was that there were multiple paths to solving this particular puzzle. And so they were able to compare answers with each other and actually find that everyone found something just a little bit different. Now, what about preparing for future coursework? Well, preparation for the graduate program's required music theory seminar was achieved in 2 ways. First, showcasing individual chords or progressions allowed students to focus their discussions, just as they would in a seminar discussion. Second, they started to become familiar with the literature by reading articles and completing assignments about them. For the week during which we studied sonata form, I gave them an article by Jen Miyake on Haydn sonata forms. When they read the article, they had to complete a worksheet with some discussion questions and some basic fact recalls. And then I gave them this exercise here in class. They were given a reproduction of the chart in the article, and then they were given a piece that was not discussed in the article, and they had to figure out which of these approaches the piece used and why. And really some wonderful, insightful answers I got from these graduate students. At the end of the semester, students were given a summary of topics as well as associated clues, considerations, and strategies. This is because I wanted them to leave my course with something that they could refer to and use as a starting point. So here's just an excerpt from that particular worksheet. So for harmony, what they're looking for is different clues for what they might have. For example, if they see weak chords surrounded by tonic. Okay, they might guess tonic expansion, and then they would confirm that by looking for the passing or neighbor motion. For the Neapolitan triad, they would guess that if they see a flat 2. My rhyming has not yet caught on, but the best clue is a lowered 2. And also during this class where I gave them this parting gift, I had one of my favorite worksheets for this semester, which I call What Is That? And we acknowledge that we can't cover everything in a semester. So when they encounter something unfamiliar, what can they do to help process it? So it was a great opportunity to talk about other traditions of music theory, like Edi-Rihmani analysis and the tonettes. Also looking at how tonic might be approached contrapuntally to make sense of some of these more unusual harmonies. You'll notice that for a 6/4 chord, I say don't do anything. I just find that often they can see the 6/4 chord in the context of some other larger motion. And this is where I tell you that I often try to do things for my students that will help them remember stuff. You know, have my little rhymes. But this is by far the most expensive thing that I did to help them remember. I decided I would do a Superman-style reveal of this T-shirt. And I don't think any of them have ever forgotten that. So, okay. Also, for facilitating critical thinking, course topics were arranged in groups to include questions for synthesis. So we have, for example, 4 weeks of the course, weeks 4 through 7. And the video lecture, your fairly standard topics for a theory course: tonic and dominant, tonic expansions, some additional prolongations, and the predominant. In-class discussions focused on related but not identical topics. For tonic and dominant, we could talk about cadences and tight-knit themes. When we look at expanding tonic, then we look at second-level analysis in class. Additional prolongations allowed us to start completing some melody harmonizations, and the predominant opened up the phrase model and some popular music forms. But all of these lectures and discussion topics were connected by a single question: how can we view music theory as an additive rather than reductive process? And so we tried to connect what we were learning in class for 4 weeks to that central question. And there were about 4 or 5 unit questions for the semester. Assignments also included more detailed questions, such as unusual formal aspects, reasoning for harmonic choices, or prolongational versus functional goals, or how chords take on particular roles given the phrase structure. Some assignments also had questions intended to lead students to discover a particular aspect of a topic, such as predominant prolongations. So having learned about tonic prolongations, I gave them this excerpt from Mozart's symphony, and I asked them a series of leading questions that would allow them to see the similarity in measure 3 to what they might see for a passing tonic prolongation, draw that connection, and then come up with whatever terminology they're comfortable with to describe it. And the answer is predominant prolongation. But I really wanted to give them the opportunity to discover things for themselves. A deceptive resolution in an applied key is something that happens quite often in music, but we never really talk about it. So we talked about it. If we look at this song by Elizabeth Cotten, we see that in C major, we have our E7 chord. Now that E7 is a 5/6, but it does not go to 6, it goes to an F major chord. So really, that's a deceptive resolution in the key of 6. And just as in the Mozart example, I asked them a series of leading questions that would allow them to discover this particular topic. So what are some next steps and some results? Well, overall, students expressed a greater level of comfort with the material. In the course evaluations, I had almost 100% response rate for that, and universally positive. There was not a negative comment. We had comments like, I was finally able to connect the dots, open my eyes to alternate ways of considering these theoretical topics. For the first time in 5 years, I was actually excited to go to theory class. Fun, engaging, relevant, and accessible. and clear, concise, current, and culturally relevant. I also had the fortune to continue with a lot of these students in the next semester for the graduate seminar. And I did find, this is anecdotal, but I did find that they were more comfortable jumping into readings right away, having already discussed them in a lower stakes environment. And I'd love to explore that a little bit further. So some further modifications, we can always diversify our repertoire for our courses. That's an ongoing project. I like to explore some alternative assignment and assessment formats, such as making use of some online tools we have. And I would like to include additional examples of academic scholarship to prepare for a seminar. Ideally, I'd like to have 3 to 4 articles that they read over the course of the semester that relate to topics we're learning about. And that way they can get used to engaging with this literature. The continual reshaping and refining of the graduate review course will ensure that students emerge prepared and, most of all, confident that music theory can help them. Thank you very much.
And no surprise here, we have time for questions.
Thank you for the presentation. I enjoyed it very much. I was especially impressed with the variety of activities that you included on your day 2. And I would love to hear you a little bit talking about improvisation, like how, what, and how much you did with improvisation, since that's something you did not have time to address in the presentation.
Sure. So I think it's so important to have students improvise, and usually where we start with improvisation is improvising tight-knit themes like sentences and periods, and finding some patterns that we can use to help us. You know, one of the myths that people have about improvisation is that you sit there and wait for the muses to come down and give you something to improvise. And really, it's about learning the patterns and structures and practicing that in a disciplined way. And so I want to show them that improvisation in ways like sentences and periods, rhythmic cells, stuff like that, that's definitely possible for everybody. We just have to practice it and get used to finding those structures.
Thanks for your paper. I'm struck by the contrast to the kind of SMERG workshop yesterday and the different goals for graduate students that kind of you both have. And I was wondering if you could kind of talk in a more big picture way about how you came to the goals you have, like for instance, reading figured bass, like this kind of stuff for your graduate students. Is that because of what you see their careers doing? Is it because of the future coursework they need to do, which might be outside of your control? Can you just talk a little bit more about how you decided what matters for these graduate students?
Well, I'm an organist, so figured bass is non-negotiable. I'm sorry, but no. So I do think that things like figured bass or more traditional topics are still useful. Because with something like that, you can show certain contrapuntal motions, certain patterns that are not readily apparent in something like lead sheet style chord symbols. I wanted them, the thing that I noticed when they entered, and almost all of them failed the entrance exam. But the thing that I noticed is that they were just too focused on individual chords. And so one of my goals, as far as critical thinking was concerned, was to get them to look at the big picture, the overall line. And I thought that covering topics like tonic prolongations, that would help encourage that kind of listening and analysis. And I do realize that, certainly we do leave a lot out, over the course of the semester. But when you start to think of music horizontally, you kind of have to go over everything again and reframe the topics that they've learned about so that they can unlock more potential and it can be more useful. And as someone who, I've taught the grad seminar at Delaware for 4 years now, and I had to prepare them better. I saw what they came in with, and no, we need to do something to get them into the seminar, or else they're not going to get anything out of it. And every graduate student at Delaware has to take a theory seminar. So I really wanted it to be something that was interesting and useful. even though some topics might not be quite as popular, I probably won't give the seminar on fugues again. I was the only one that enjoyed that. Having those kinds of skills, applying to the seminar, and seeing how they could take those skills away and extrapolate those from the smaller topics of the seminar, I thought was a really important thing to do.
Any other questions?
Who are your graduate students and what do they need to do in the future and how does your class kind of play into that?
So our graduate students, they're only master's students, and they are performance or music ed. And I think they're about evenly split that way. Universally, the feedback that I get about the theory courses that I teach is that almost word for word, we want to be able to use this as performers and pedagogues. That's their own stated goal. So showing them first how we can make theory something a little more educational and a little more accessible for everyone was a really important thing for me to do. In a traditional course, technically it was the material that made them cry, not me, but I still feel bad about it. So I wanted to help them really understand that theory was for them, and they can bring a little bit of that to everywhere else. As far as music ed is concerned, I mean, they were going into a wide range of fields. And so I think just allowing them to see that when we have these analytical skills, we can scale them up or down as we need to meet our audience. And I'm very big on teaching music theory to non-musicians. I gave a talk a couple years ago in Philly about, I called it the T word, teaching music theory to your choirs at church, and how to apply the skills that we know and the skills we have and make them accessible to other folks and make them something that other people can use.
Anybody else?
Thanks, Chris, for the talk. In passing, a few times you just mentioned aural skills or hearing the music, and I'm wondering if you can comment just briefly on how you've been able to incorporate listening skills, either to reinforce the written work or as a separate topic.
Sure. So one of the other points of feedback that I received in the traditional course is that they wanted more oral skills, and there was also an oral skills component on the entrance exam. So I approached this in a few ways. First, if we were introducing something new or some kind of related aspect, I would often approach it by starting with them taking down a dictation or listening for something or singing. And then we would use it as a springboard to get to the material. In fact, my video lecture on the Neapolitan triad, it's a Schubert waltz, 3 ways. It starts out in A major, and then it's A minor 5 to 6, and then it has a Neapolitan in minor, and so they can hear how that progresses. As far as in class, singing is really important. We sing the examples that we write. We have some sight singing that I do with them. We have some canons. Again, I'm the only one that likes them, but they're great. And I like to play like a little air horn sound on my phone when we have cannons. And so I think that that's really important for them to get used to singing together, and it helps to build a sense of community. As far as the assignments are concerned, I do have some oral skills questions on the quizzes, and on homework assignments, like for modal mixture, they're given an excerpt and they should say approximately where they hear modal mixture happening. And as far as the skills that I wanted them to get, hearing that there is modal mixture, that would flag for them something for further analysis. And that's really what I wanted them to get.
All right, we have time for one more very short question if anyone has one.
All right.
I just wanted to know where you got that stick. That was really cool.
This is because my old one broke. I was a little bit too during the grad seminar once, and so I decided to get one that's a little sturdier from Amazon.
I just wanted to know, could I get that T-shirt?
Absolutely, yes. Merch will be for sale, I'm sure, in the near future. Because, you know, I tell my students every semester, like, I spent real money on this shirt for you, so I hope you take this away. Like, please don't write 164. And they do it anyway, but oh well.
All right, unfortunately, time flies when we're having fun, and I've had a blast at today's presentation. So join me again in thanking all of our presenters. As usual, if you have other questions, feel free to take them out to lunch. But enjoy a brief 15-minute break before we start our poster session.